shows the strengths we have and the opportunities that independence will bring. Our panellists tonight are Jackie Taylor, Stuart Stevenson, our MSP, and Michael Foley. Once we've heard from all the speakers, there will be a question and answer session. When we get to that part, for the sake of good order, all questions should be through the chair. I'm sorry, but this is not a platform tonight for an argument. This is to give you answers to help you make a decision. I will now hand you over to the speakers, and to start with, we'll have Jackie Taylor.
Hi, thanks Linda. My name's Jackie Taylor. I'm not a member of any political party, but I've been a supporter of independence for Scotland for over a decade. I'm involved in the campaign for a Yes vote for Scotland, as this is our chance to create a system of fairness and justice, which are the two things I'm most passionate about. For over 50% of the time since the end of the Second World War, Scotland has been governed by a system which is both unjust and unfair. For years, due to this unfair system, we've been governed by political parties we did not vote for. Political parties who, it is clear, do not have Scotland's best interests at heart. I was brought up in an old mining village in West Lothian, and I remember the closure of the mines by the Thatcher government and how this destroyed so many communities. I remember the closure of Cameron Ironworks and British Leyland and Bathgate, leaving communities desolate. Yes, you could argue that these industries were on the decline anyway. However, what cannot be argued is that the speed at which these closures were implemented, with no allowance, time or funding for any retraining or re-educating of the people who had worked in these industries most of their lives, and these communities are still suffering. And now, 30 years on, we have a party who does not think twice about imposing legislation such as the bedroom tax. This tax, which affects over 80,000 people in Scotland, the majority of which are disabled, is one of the most unfair pieces of legislation since the poll tax. Both policies implemented by Tory governments we did not vote for. This tax is affecting the most vulnerable in our society, people who need our help, not to be discriminated against. The Scottish Government, recognising the unfairness of this tax, have allocated £35 million to help victims of the policy by means of discretionary housing payments. They recently asked Westminster ministers to remove a cap on the payments to allow the cash to go through and help people facing poverty. But 5 weeks after, Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon wrote to the Welfare Minister Lord Freud to ask for the minor legal change, she has not had a reply. What does that tell you about the respect Westminster has for Scotland? We know from the effect of closure of the mining and manufacturing industries how the legacy has affected today's generation. What will be the long-term impact to people and families of the bedroom tax? The changes to the welfare benefits system with the introduction of the work programme as a way to save money, not as the Tories would have you believe to support people to find work, has been an unmitigated disaster, with hundreds of people coming out of the programme after 2 years with nothing except an abject sense of failure. Soon, lone parents with children under 3 will have to undertake work-related activity or have their benefits cut. What about the family unit? What about child welfare? What about choice? We hear about food banks and how more and more people are using them as they cannot afford to eat. We hear about food banks running out of food. We know that in 2011 there were 710,000 people living in poverty in Scotland. These Westminster policies will make this figure worse. In this day and age, it's scandalous to think that people do not have enough money to eat. The only way that we can establish a fair and equal system and get the party, and thus the policies which will work for Scotland, is by voting yes in September. I draw the comparison between businesses who apply one type global approach to their operations and those who change in recognition of the differences in local cultures and needs. Why would you think that something which works in an inner city would work in a sparsely rural community? I remember when I worked with employability in the past and the times when the Department of Work and Pensions, still governed by Westminster, insisted that unemployed individuals who lived in the remote west coast of Scotland had to take part in a mandatory unpaid work placement, despite the nearest place being nearly 50 miles away. These individuals had no transport, and public transport was no use. It was impossible to make it happen. And yet, because the rules said so, they had to do it or face losing their benefits, and they lost their benefits. If you vote no in September, then Scotland will never reach its full potential, and Scotland has a great potential. Income from our oil revenue, instead of being squandered away, can be pumped into an oil fund, something which could have been set up many years ago. Norway, a country which has been likened to Scotland, currently has £500 million in its sovereign oil fund. It is estimated that there is approximately £31.53 trillion left in the North Sea, and recent investment in the North Sea amounted to £14 million for this year and will be £13 million in 2015. Scotland, if independent, could be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Our GDP output is the 8th highest per head of population out of 34 of the OECD member countries, and our gross income per head is estimated to be around £26,000 compared with £24,000 for the UK as a whole. And yet we have 710,000 people living in poverty. Scotland has rich and diverse offerings within a range of key industries, including food and drink worth over 13 billion, a tourism industry worth over 9 billion, is a world leader in life sciences and world-class universities. Only last week Whitehall confirmed that Scotland has the strongest economy in the UK outside London and the South East. I'm not making light of this very difficult and important decision. We won't get it right all the time, and mistakes will be made. This is, however, a one chance for us to put faith in ourselves, to believe that we're a strong nation and we have the assets to survive as an independent country. When making your decision on the 18th of September, you have to consider if you want to continue to live as part of a union which has created one of the most unequal societies in the developed world. Do you want to continue to have unfair and unjust policies imposed on you, policies which are not in our best interests? Do you want to have a real say in your future and be listened to for the future of your children and grandchildren and for generations to come? Are you prepared to take the gamble that tuition fees may be introduced for students studying in Scotland if the vote is to stay in the Union? Are you happy to see the continuation of the bedroom tax, leading, there is no doubt, to a rise in poverty levels? See the further eroding of the family unit with the welfare benefit changes and cuts to child benefit? And we have no guarantee that the current powers held by the Scottish Government will remain as they are. But there are no guarantees whatever you vote for, and indeed in all elections when you vote you're never 100% sure that the party you vote for will deliver on their promises. So whatever you vote for on the 18th of September, make sure that you do it based on an informed choice. There's a range of information out there about how an independent Scotland could look, so take time to read those papers. Read the white paper from the SNP, the independence paper produced by the Green Party, and vote wisely for the future of Scotland and for the people of Scotland. Thank you.
Now I'll ask my colleagues to speak next.
Right, this is my first public meeting standing up here speaking, and people ask me if I'm actually nervous about this, and the truth is I'm a little bit nervous, but being an Aberdeen fan I'm more nervous about the League Cup final on Sunday. But yeah, looking forward to this. So on the 18th of September, whether we vote yes or no, Scotland will be an independent country for 15 hours. The debate about this referendum is simple. It's about whether we extend that 15 hours permanently or whether we give that sovereignty, that authority, that responsibility back to a Westminster government that in at least half of elections since Second World War we didn't even vote for. There are two main reasons why I'm voting for independence. The first one, as Jackie alluded to, is about fairness. I don't think first past the post is a fair voting system when MPs can be elected with as much as 20% of the vote. I don't think it's fair that majority governments can be elected when they get just under half the whole national vote. So that's one reason why I'm voting independence, to change that. I also don't think it's fair that there's a House of Lords who can influence policy, and yet we as citizens anywhere in the UK can't do anything about it because they're appointed, not elected. Those are not signs of a normal, democratic 21st century country. Under independence, we can change that. The second main reason, and more serious reason I'm for independence, is because of my concern about the future of the welfare state. When I'm not volunteering for Yes Moray, I'm at the Citizens Advice Bureau in Moray, so I'm not just reading about these welfare reforms, I'm seeing them. Now, there are two themes that we are seeing a lot of in the Bureau in the last few months. The first, as Jackie mentioned, was the rise of food banks. Jackie alluded to them, and I'll add meat to the bones to give you some real figures to play with here. The Trussell Trust is one of many charities in Scotland that deal with food banks, and in 2011 they gave food parcels to 5,726 people. In 2012 and 2013, this rose to 14,318 people. And this month, just a week ago in fact, their most recent figures show that they gave food parcels to over 56,000 people. That's frightening, and that doesn't sound like a fair and United Kingdom to me. The second key theme we're seeing is how inhumane the welfare system appears to be going. A lot of people come to the Bureau because they live on incapacity benefit. Not because they want to, but because they have to. They can't work. And what the government are doing are getting rid of incapacity benefits and replacing it with employment and support allowance. And they are charging a company you may have heard of, they're called Atos, and they are tasked with assessing people and interviewing them to see if they're fit for work. They're given rules such as whether people are able to walk more than 200 yards, whether they can chew food independently, whether they can bend over and pick up a pound coin. And what we're finding with these strict rules is that a lot of people are being considered fit for work. So they're told you can't get ESA, you must get job seekers allowance. Yet their doctors, who know exactly what they're like, say that they're not fit for work. So because they're not fit for work, they cannot be seen as actively looking for work, so they can't qualify for job seekers allowance either. So you have this crazy scenario where they can't qualify for job seekers allowance, they can't qualify for employment and support allowance, so they don't have any income at all. That's absolute madness, and shows that Westminster not only are completely messing up the welfare system, they don't even know what they're doing. And I think the saddest thing about this is that the reason we're in austerity isn't because of the poor, or because of the deprived, or because of the sick. We're in this mess because bankers bit off more than they could chew and got us in this whole financial mess in the first place. And Westminster's done nothing about it. So what they've done by targeting the poor is by claiming that there's this Jeremy Kyle generation, that people would rather stay at home and live on benefits, and they're stealing lots of welfare money through fraud. But the facts say otherwise. Of all the people receiving benefits, only 3% are unemployed. The rest are working, trying to get out the cycle. Benefit fraud is responsible for the loss of 0.7% of the entire welfare budget. Let me put that into perspective. The Treasury lost 15 times that amount to companies like Google and Starbucks, who only paid 1% of their taxes, and nothing's been done about it. They target the poor because they're easier targets. They're easier to bully, they're easier to scare, they're easier to stereotype, rather than go against companies and banks who can hire lawyers and withdraw election funding. Now, some of you may be thinking, independence isn't the answer. All we need to do is elect Labour in 2015, the party that stands for working class values. Well, Labour's track record shows that not only are they not the solution, they're part of the problem, the Westminster problem. An OECD study, they're a body who calculate wealth of countries and so on, they found that in 1985, the 10% richest people in Britain had 8 times the amount of money than the poorest 10%. In 2008, this has doubled, so the gap between rich and poor is now 12 times the amount. That's absolutely shocking, and it shows that Labour had 11 years of that period where they could have helped reduce inequality, and not only did they not, they made it worse. They helped make it worse, in fact. Furthermore, when it comes to the welfare state, Electing Labour in 2015 doesn't make a difference because they intend to do these exact same cuts that the Tories and Lib Dems have in mind. Liam Byrne in 2012, he's the Labour MP for Birmingham Hodge Hill, he said that the welfare reform is needed for modern times. The timing of his remark is significant because in 2012 he was Labour's Shadow Secretary for Work and Pensions. He's their equivalent of Ian Duncan Smith. So Labour aren't part of the solution, they're part of the problem. I believe that independence gives us the opportunity to get proper governments that can introduce policies that reflect what we truly believe. Up north, we believe in community, not commodity. We believe in respecting those who can't help themselves, instead of stereotyping them based on a tiny minority. And above all else, we are more than capable of doing things for ourselves. Devolution has proved that. Just look at the difference in our services to those down south in England. Independence gives us an excellent opportunity to elect people, to elect our own governments that care for us and will actually implement policies that we believe in. This is an excellent opportunity to change Scotland's future, not for my generation or your generations, but the generations to come. So please don't throw away this opportunity, please. Thank you.
Now we'll ask Stuart to have a word with us.
Thank you very much, Linda. Isn't it fascinating? We've just had two intensely political speeches from people who are not politicians. So as a politician, I'm not going to make a political speech. I'm just going to address some of the questions that I've been asked and that people have been asking as I and others go around Scotland on this fascinating debate that we're having that is filling holes right across Scotland, is reinvigorating communities with engagement in a key opportunity to really make a big change. And let me just start by saying how unpolitical, in one sense, this actually is. There are 5 political parties represented in the Scottish Parliament, 129 members. I'm absolutely certain from talking to colleagues in all political parties that every one of those 5 political parties has members within it who will be voting yes. Yes, Conservatives. Yes, Labour. Liberal Democrats I'm slightly less certain about, but there is one I'm fairly confident will vote yes. Greens and the SNP certainly will. So this is not about political parties. It's not like normal politics, if you like. And I hope tonight we can talk about your concerns rather than politicians' issues. Now, of course, I've been in politics a heck of a long time. I joined the SNP 52 years ago. Other members of my family have been involved in politics. I hope Michael will forgive me. One of my father's cousins was in the House of Lords. He did do something good for this area and a lot of other Scotland. He drafted the Immature Spirits Bill of 1915, which is what introduced the rule that whisky has to be kept in bond for 3 years, and that had the effect of improving the quality of whisky and laying the foundations for a successful export industry. So he was in the House of Lords, but he wasn't necessarily a bad person, and not everybody who's there is. However, and Michael made reference to it, the House of Lords is a very unusual body. There are 820 members of the House of Lords, 650 members of the House of Commons. That's therefore 1,470. That is the second biggest parliament in the entire world. The United States has only got 560. It's only Red China that has nearly 2,000. And not only that, the structure of the House of Lords would mean that if the UK wanted to join the EU today, it would be unable to do so. Because to do so, the very first test that is met is you must meet the European Convention on Human Rights, and Protocol 1, Section 1 to that is the electorate must be able to dismiss its legislators. And we can't dismiss our legislators in the House of Lords. Anyway, that's really nothing to do with it. Let's just talk about one or two other things. Citizenship. This is one of the things that has come up from time to time. By the way, I'm going to quote from a number of things, and just so that you can go away and check my quotes, I've got a bit of paper there that has got all the quotes and the references. You can go and look at everything I make reference to. You can go and look and see if I'm misquoting, incompletely quoting, or whether when you go and read it there are other questions to come up with. We've heard a lot about borders. Well, let me just say, if you've ever driven from Belfast to Dublin, the only way you know the border is where it is because when you go south, there's a sign at the side of the road saying the speed limit is now 100, not 60. 100 kilometres per hour, because in the Republic they measure in kilometres per hour. There's nothing else. There's not a line in the road, there's no gatehouse, there's nothing. But it's even more interesting than that. One of my nieces used to live in Norway. She commuted daily from outside the EU to Sweden to work without any formality, because Sweden, Iceland are part of the Schengen Agreement, so you can move freely within there. So being an independent state doesn't mean you have borders. But even more interesting, in 1949, the United Kingdom government legislated under the Ireland Act. And I'm just going to read what it said, because this is absolutely fascinating. Section 2 is headed, "The Republic of Ireland is not a foreign country. It is hereby declared, etc., the Republic of Ireland is not a foreign country for the purposes of any law enforced in any part of the United Kingdom, whether by virtue of rule of law or act of Parliament," and so on. That is why, incidentally, there was a tragic helicopter accident that killed 4 people in the south of England today. And the guy whose helicopter it was is a Northern Ireland politician who has served in the Irish Senate and the UK House of Lords. So you can choose the relationships you have, even though you're independent states. And when the United Kingdom is asked to choose, it tends to choose partnership. Citizenship. There have been 23 occasions when the UK has legislated for countries to become independent since 1946, starting with Sri Lanka, and the last independence bill was for the Bahamas. And let me just quote from the Bahamas one, section 3, because this is an important point for how things are likely to work afterwards. Retention of citizenship of the United Kingdom and colonies by certain peoples connected with the Bahamas. And basically, what it says is, if you were a UK citizen before independence, you're still a UK citizen after independence. In other words, you get your Bahamian citizenship added to your UK citizenship. So if you want to be a UK citizen after independence, the odds are the UK is going to be quite happy that you do that. But of course, if we're in the EU in any event, it really doesn't matter, because we're all European citizens and we're entitled to retain that. Now, let's just talk about the EU. The rules of the EU are called the acquis. That's basically the rules that govern how the EU works. And the interesting thing about the rules, and I've given you the reference so you can go away and look at all this, although you won't enjoy it very much, but it's there to do. There is no provision for Scotland being taken out of the EU. There is no rule by which that can happen. And there are 3 ways that Scotland's in the EU. The first is I suspect almost everybody in the room, is a EU citizen. Our passports say European at the top of the page, page 1. There is no provision in the acquis for depriving us of EU citizenships, whatever happens. Secondly, there is the territory and resources of Scotland. If we become an independent country, there is no process in the acquis by which we can have our land and our territory thrown out. The third point is, of course, how we're represented in the decision-making bodies of the EU. And that's where there is an issue, where we have to get our seat at the top table. Now, we've just seen Croatia take its seat as the 28th member of the EU. And when, as a minister, I used to go to the meetings in the European Union, Council meetings of one sort or another, for a number of years, Croatia's been sitting there. And if you actually think of what happened, for example, when East Germany came into West Germany and became one republic, East Germany, no previous history of democracy, no previous history of application of EU rules. How long did it take East Germany to become part of the EU? 12 weeks. That's how long it took. The EU is an expansionist body with a quarter of the renewable energy of Europe, almost all the oil of Europe, a bankrupt Spanish fishing industry if the Spaniards don't get access to our fishing grounds. And of course, that's an interesting one. You know, we might want that one way or the other. They're going to be demanding that we're absolutely in the EU, so be in no question about that. Now, there's been a bit of a debate about money, and that leads us to the Vienna Convention on Successor States, and the reference to that is on here as well, which is basically the rules, the law, that determine when two states come from one, or more than two states from one, what happens to the assets and liabilities. Now, there's two ways it can work, and both of them are okay with us. One is that you can say, right, okay, you split it up. Now, in population terms, you split by population. We're 8.5% of the UK, so on movable assets, we would get 8.5% of the assets. On fixed assets that attach to land, you get it by territory. And that's why the oil is Scottish, but the movable assets we get 8.5% of. And of course, the UK government has already legislated in the 1960s to draw the line as to oil above that line is Scottish, oil below that line is elsewhere. Oh, and incidentally, and this is just a little wee wrinkle in that legislation, the Isle of Man got a guaranteed proportion of the oil revenues. Scotland didn't get a guaranteed proportion of the oil revenues, but the Isle of Man did. Mainly because they had gas fields between Blackpool and the Isle of Man. But, you know, there are all sorts of little wrinkles like that that people kind of don't realise. But the bottom line is, suppose they don't let us have the power. That's actually not a bad thing in some ways. Because if we don't get to have the assets, and we own 8.5% of the Bank of England, remember, you know, it's ours. If we don't get it, we don't actually get the debts out, because that's the way the Vienna Convention on Successor States works. And if we don't get to keep the pound, you know what the effect of that is? Every man, woman and child becomes £30,000 richer overnight. So if you think that they're going to allow that to happen, by denying us access to the pound, I don't think so. In the case that we've had where South Sudan came out of Sudan, became an independent country, in that case they didn't get any of the assets, they didn't get any of the debts. But in most cases, they agreed to split. For example, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Let's do a wee word about defence and whether the UK serves Scotland's needs in defence. Now, I live near Banff. We were able, not that long ago, to stand at Macduff and look out in the Moray Firth and see the Kuznetsov moored in the Moray Firth, a Russian military vessel. The UK Ministry of Defence, now they've no longer got any Nimrods to go out and have a sniff around and see what's going on, and with all the naval vessels based in the south of England, learned of the presence of the Kuznetsov, and the Minister admitted this in the House of Commons when a Russian sailor on the Kuznetsov tweeted on Twitter that they were moored in the Moray Firth. That's how the UK were able to work out there was a potential threat to our interests. Now, we've got the longest coastline in Europe. We've got all this oil, we've got fishing. Our interests are maritime interests. And yet we've no defence worth a tinker's cuss that addresses our interests. If we did it ourselves, we would do it so much better. Now, have we got the experience to work in the modern world internationally? Well, as a minister, it may surprise you, relationships between the UK and the devolved administrations, but particularly Scotland, are much better than you might sometimes imagine when you read some of the stuff in the paper. I have been the lead minister on behalf of the UK, negotiating with Spain on occasion, with Poland on occasion. I travelled with UK civil servants to 4-day meetings in Poland to negotiate with the UK, with France as well. I've sat down and talked to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, I did that when I was in Durban in South Africa. And all the ministers in the Scottish Government are doing that same sort of thing all the time. We know how to do it, and actually we're trusted to do it by the UK on their behalf, which is really quite ironic. Finally, this week is the annual update of the GERS figures, that's General Expenditure and Revenue Scotland. This is something that was started 30 years ago with the Tories in an attempt to show that Scotland was just a basket case economically. The only difficulty is that every single year it's been published, long before the SNP ever got into government, but continuing, it shows they were actually better off independently. The gap is closed in the most recent figures, which were 2012-13. Why have they closed? Because the revenue from oil is reduced. Why is the revenue from oil reduced? Because in 2011 the UK government changed the tax regime for the oil industry and they stopped investing. They got persuaded to reset it, and they're investing more in the oil industry than they've done for generations. So 1 year, where we're still doing level pegging with the UK, whereas most years we're ahead of it. In the last 5 years, we actually would have been £8,500 million better off if we're looking after our own money. Now that's far more than enough from the three of us at the top table. I think it's now time, Linda, that we got the audience to take charge of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take questions from you. We'll take two at a time and then we'll ask the panel to give you your answers. Is there any questions? James will come round with the microphone and let you speak. Anybody with any questions?
Too shy.
Right, come on, Linda. Can I ask a question? Because this always gets it going. This is my standard question that people won't ask questions. Right, how many people came here tonight in a train? Right, I know the answer to that. I don't think anybody came by train, did they? How many people came by bus? Not very many by bus. How many came by car? How many came by bicycle? No, somebody came by bicycle. How many walked? Right, that's pretty good. Now, we're now in the habit of asking and answering questions as an audience. Can you now ask us some questions? Even if they're silly questions, at least they'll get us going. Right, well done.
Just to start us off, I wonder if somebody in the panel would like to tell us why they think David Cameron wants to keep Scotland so desperately. And because obviously it would seem that, you know, Scotland goes, Labour Party vote was down, and the Tories would be in Westminster forever. So, perhaps.
Hello there. I think my answer would be there's two parts to that. The first one is, of course, if there's one thing we've learned in recent times about Westminster is that whenever oil's around, they love to jump in and get involved. I mean, this may be cynical, but that's why I believe they went to Iraq. So as long as we have oil, David Cameron and everyone at Westminster are going to want to keep us on board. The second part, I feel, is that, particularly with him being a Tory, is that there's this strong sense of British nationalism in Rule Britannia, and some of them still believe that they're this mighty empire like they were back in the Victorian times, so they want to retain as much territory as they possibly can. So if we were to leave the United Kingdom, then obviously it makes them smaller, and it makes them a smaller drum to bang on, if you can say. So I'd say that there's a sense of nationalism involved, as well as the more economic things like oil.
That question contained one of the great fallacies. There's actually